The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.
Welcome back to our weekly podcast. It is the Keefer and Kurre show right here on Tony Kurre Radio. Of course, you can hear the show at least 5 days a week. You can also hear a Kip show called Need to Know, which we just did a few minutes ago. And of course, we're recording this show the day before elections. I think we talked enough about politics, so I wanted to get off a little bit, do something a little fun, but something that you are just as an expert in as you are in the political arena, and that is music. We just lost one Quincy Jones over the weekend, and I was on Fox 6 earlier this morning, and you and I spoke briefly before we started this thing that I said that Quincy Jones is the most important musical person on earth ever. And people sit there and say, well, the last 50 years. No, I think music is totally different. I think it sounds different. I think without Quincy Jones, we don't have my favorite song, which is 100 Ways from James Ingram from The Dude in 1981. We just don't have, we don't have The Color Purple. We don't have so many things that I think are so culturally important, certainly here in the United States. And you even brought up, like George Martin and the Beatles. And I was asked the question, if you had to get rid of one or the other, the Beatles or Quincy Jones, I'd say I'd have to get rid of the Beatles. Eventually, I think it would work its way out. These people would find these harmonies and these melodic tunes that the Beatles were. I'm not saying they would be the Beatles. And I'm not certainly saying the Beatles didn't change the way we listen to music, but I think a producer's job is much different than the songwriter's job. What's your thoughts?
Absolutely. Or the performers. I mean, and I think a lot of people are probably going, Quincy Jones, oh yeah, I've heard of him. But Tony, I think it's really, maybe it's kind of a conundrum and a tribute to Quincy Jones. Quincy Jones never demanded to be the guy out front. Quincy Jones was the genius. If you go to a great restaurant, you never see the chef. You never see the guy who really is responsible. Now we've had some chefs step up now and put their face on things, but Quincy Jones was behind the scenes. And I think, you just mentioned a couple of things, but Quincy Jones touched so many things that were so influential, and he never was a guy that, he would be on award shows and get recognized, but that was really not what he was about. And I think a lot of people don't even realize just how giant a figure this guy was, not just in music, but in entertainment overall.
28 Grammys. He was nominated for 80. That is third all time behind Beyonce.
That's crazy.
Who's got 32. And Sir George Salty, who also had 31, he had 28. No, and if you get on Reddit and some of these auras and some of these chat rooms and stuff today, there's actually a question out there that says, would Michael Jackson have been successful without Quincy Jones? That's how important Quincy Jones was. Of course, he did Off the Wall. He did Thriller. He also did Bad. Michael Jackson was Michael Jackson when he was 5. I mean, Michael Jackson was going to be big one way or another. And I'm not saying that he's the Phil Jackson of the music industry where he just latched on. He does have the best selling album of all time, that being Thriller. And of course, the Grammys and his own albums. Quincy Jones. You know what he is? And you brought this up. He's the Burt Bacharach of producers.
Oh, Burt Bacharach
never had a hit song. He wrote hundreds of songs, but he never had his own hit song. I think he was in the top 40 one time. But he knew how to write music for other people. And, Prince was really, really good at that. Daryl Hall and John Oates, a lot of people are like, why in the hell is Hall stay with Oates? He doesn't do anything. Let me tell you what, Oates has done everything for Daryl Hall. He's written everything he's ever sang. He's written songs for Ice House. He's written songs for Whitney Houston. He's written songs for everybody.
Yep.
Oates is one of those guys. Again, you don't have Hall and Oates without Oates. You don't. Yeah, it's interesting because I'm a rock and roll guy, and the producers aren't on stage and they're not singing the songs, and heck, they don't even write the songs. But they do have to have the trust of the individual musician in order to put their own twist on things. I go back to was it Glenn? I think it was Glenn Jones, who was one of the early producers for the Eagles, when they first came out, you listen to some of their old stuff. It was country. It had a country music sound to it.
Definitely country rock at best, for sure.
And there was certainly nothing, Tequila Sunrise. There was some mellow stuff, man, really mellow stuff. And even their album covers look like, something you'd see on Yellowstone or something, right? And then, of course, you get to a point where they're like, hey, listen, the guys in the band want to take it a different direction. You move producers. I don't know anyone that's had a producer for their entire career for 25 years. And then you had something that sounded like Hotel California, which really sounded totally different than anything they had done in the past,
Mm-hmm.
and of course took them to the level. And I was thinking about some other producers that can move with the times, because when you're talking about Quincy Jones, this guy worked with Frank Sinatra. I
See,
mean, he took "Fly Me Away" and made it from a slow dance song to a swing tune. He played
so
he
let's
played the
let's
trumpet
just
for
let's
Elvis
just
Presley.
let's put that under the microscope, because that's a fantastic point. This guy, the range from Frank Sinatra to Michael Jackson and so many
Oh,
others. I mean, let's just talk about the technology. Frank Sinatra, Tony, had his lyrics. He didn't write his songs. They found songs they thought would fit Frank. Frank Sinatra's recording style was to go into a studio with a full orchestra, and he would have them he would sing the lyrics how he, in the way that he sang them, which was so unusual, with his own spin and his own voice inflections, and then would have the orchestra lay down tracks around his vocals and vice versa. That was the process. By the time Michael Jackson came along, Quincy Jones involved from a full-scale orchestra to the beginnings of computer technology and all of the different things that can be used. So for a guy to be able to transition from the very basics of recordings for music to the modern day, I mean, Quincy Jones was extraordinary. Just I can't even begin to describe the respect I have for who he is. And a lot of people can't transition to a completely different mode of a particular industry, and he did it flawlessly.
and I don't know how this correlates from a music producer to, say, a movie producer, but he did that as well. The Color Purple, of course, was his first movie. It was nominated for 11 Academy Awards. No, but when I go back and look at Sanford and Son, he wrote that song. I mean, it's just, and what a lot of people don't realize, like Bob James wrote the theme song to Taxi. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of those early TV shows were written by jazz artists. They were
Yep.
written by, because that's the type of music they wanted to have, and Quincy Jones was a jazz guy. The other thing that a lot of people realize, he was a master trumpet player. I actually studied him when I went to Lakota High School.
Amazing.
I actually had a class about him, and he stopped playing trumpet in, I think it's the mid to late 70s, because he had an aneurysm, and his doctor said, you can't play the trumpet anymore. It'll kill you. And he did it again. And I don't know, something came out of place in something they put in his head, and they're like, don't do it again. So he never played the trumpet again, which is an interesting story. And he actually
Huh.
played trumpet on several of Elvis Presley's records, including Heartbreak Hotel. Um, and it's funny because I listened to that song this morning. I was like, is there a trumpet in that song? I don't even remember hearing a Heartbreak Hotel, a trumpet in that song, but there sure as hell is. But yeah, and I, it's interesting because when you're talking about producers too, I try to go back, and I wanted to go back, and I don't know, I'm assuming you're well versed in this. Do you have any other producers that you can think of off the top of your head that when you see, like, for example, Mutt Lange? Mutt Lange has produced everything from AC/DC to the Cars to Foreigner to the Boomtown Rats. He did the Bangles. He was married to Shania. He was married to Shania Twain.
Wow, what a resume.
He was married to Shania Twain until he started doing the woman who was watching their kids. She came in, and the next thing you know, he's having sex with a nanny and Shania Twain. So something must have been wrong there, because you look at Shania Twain, you're like, why in the world would you want to be with the nanny when you get
Yeah, good
Shania Twain?
grief.
But he produced her stuff. He was also the first one to produce Shania Twain's country album and her top 40 album, because that's when country music didn't cross over. You needed to make it a little differently so those top 40
Yes.
stations would play it. But I knew that if it was a Mutt Lange album, I was going to listen to it. Ted Templeton was another guy that produced a lot of the Van Halen records. He produced 1984, Fair Warning, the first Van Halen album. And I just always, I see names. I remember picking up albums and looking to see who the producer was on the album. And I was probably one of the few people to do that, because I would buy it for the producer as well as the group. But I don't know if you have any producers. I know you're a big Jackson Browne fan, and I know you're into a bunch of the 70s stuff and the songwriter stuff, but I was just going through some of those things to see, who some of the best producers were. Did you have any that you could think of?
I mean, we've touched on the couple because I've been an admirer of Quincy Jones forever, and you mentioned that I talked about George Martin
Mhm.
because I think as phenomenal as the Beatles became, I think George Martin was as responsible for that ascension as any of the four guys in the actual band. And take nothing away from Lennon, McCartney, Harrison, and Starr, but George Martin was one of the most innovative producers in the history of music from the standpoint of he would take those songs, the guys would come in. I just got to see Tony, and I'm really blessed to have been able to do this. 4 days before the Mirage was closed for good in Las Vegas, they had the Love Show,
Mm.
Cirque du Soleil Beatles tribute that
I
ran
never
for.
saw it, man. I wish I'd
Oh
seen it.
man, I wish you could have. It ran for 27 years there, and we saw the fourth to last performance ever when I was out there back in August, and it was. I had seen it a couple of times over the years, but this one was so emotional because this music was kind of the anthem of my entire life. I mean, and the behind the scenes stuff in that presentation of George Martin sitting in the control room, and he goes, play that again, but try this and do that, and then he says, okay, I've got some ideas. He was like the earliest guy to put different sounds. Remember the Beatles song "Story"? Or let's see, I got to get this right here. Um, uh, and it wasn't "Story of a Life." What was the song where woke up, got out of bed, ran
Yeah,
my comb across my
yeah.
all of the different all the different music and sound effects. I mean, that was never done before the early 1960s, and this guy introduced all that into their music. And you know, when I think of music
A
producers,
day in the life, by the way.
Day in the
Yeah,
Life.
yeah.
I just
It hit me
Story
up.
of a Life is a
Yeah, you're
it's a
close. No,
Harry
you're close. You're right on.
Story of a Life is a Harry Chapin song that I love, but
Yeah.
that's another that's uh because you had guys like Harry Chapin who was his own producer, and he was an experimenter. But I'd have to say the only guy that I really, and I'm sure there's many more, but George Martin and Quincy Jones to me, if I had a producer Hall of Fame, those would be the two guys busts you saw right when you walked in the door.
Yeah, and I mean some of the more recent ones. I know people are listening right now. Babyface is also a huge producer. He's had a ton of Grammys. Dr. Dre is also a great
Oh
producer,
yeah,
and
Dr.
obviously,
Dre's, yeah.
and obviously he's Phil Spector was another one of those
Oh
people.
yeah.
Despite the
Oh,
fact that
a wacky son of a bitch, but
he was he was a wacky son of a bitch for sure, man. He could produce some records though. It's
I'll
unbelievable.
say.
And I was just kind of going through Todd Rundgren is another one of
Oh
those
yeah.
people who,
Yeah.
and Todd would tell you that he'd rather be known for his production than his
Yes.
music itself. I mean,
That's a great one.
this guy wrote, England Ann and John Ford Coley hits. And I mean, he wrote a ton of great music, and he wrote some for obviously himself. But he also produced a lot of things. And then you mentioned George Martin and even Beyonce's in here because I mean she does a lot of produce because a lot of people now just kind of want to
Yeah,
produce their
and you
own
brought up
thing.
Burt Bacharach, who we lost just a couple of years ago,
Mhm.
who only had the one hit himself,
Yeah,
and probably how many Grammys did Burt Bacharach rack in? I'm sure it was a ridiculous amount,
I
but
think
he wrote
yeah.
songs for people all across the board. So those kind of people, that kind of talent, it's just amazing to me. I guess Bert's only hit was "You See This Guy." I think that was the song.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but I don't know. I like to celebrate the fact that I've got a pretty varied skill set, but these guys do things that I could never conceive of doing because they have such innovative ideas and approaches, and they take great music and great lyrics and they make them something otherworldly, like classic. And what the talent that those people have is something that I have so much admiration for.
I was listening to a show on the way in. I don't mind giving props to props, but it was on NPR, and they had a couple of musical scientists on. They were talking about how music, a melancholy song, can make you feel, or a serene song, or a sad song, or a happy song, or whatever, and how it works in your brain. And they were talking about those situations where you hear something, you feel something, you may have heard it before, um, but it's indescribable. You can't follow it, and she said it was kind of like if you're going to do a concert that was so good that it moved you, and then at the end, there's this uncomfortable quietness where everyone's like, "Holy shit, that was unbelievable!" I mean,
Yep.
you know, and it's a moment in time where you almost can't describe how it interacted with you socially, culturally, emotionally, physically. And they said that's something that is beautiful about music, because music, it can take you outside of yourself. It can take you outside of emotions that perhaps you've never felt before. They were going through the whole idea of neuroerotic and Alzheimer's, MS, all the kinds of diseases.
Hmm.
And of course, Tony Bennett is a prime example of that. A guy who he looked in the mirror and didn't know who he was, but when his company, a pianist company, would start playing the piano, he would just start singing his songs.
Click right in. Yep.
I mean, he's up there in, Madison Square Garden or wherever it was with Lady Gaga, and he's 90 something years old. He's got full blown dementia, and he's singing every single song he's ever written. And
The brain is fascinating. It
really
really is.
And so, from a musical standpoint, envy is one of the seven deadly sins. It's something I have to work through. I've been super blessed that I've been on stage in front of 75,000 people. And I've got radio shows, and I do stuff with you, and I'm so blessed to do TV. I'm so fortunate. But when I see someone like a Quincy Jones or a Burt Bacharach or a Prince could play every instrument on his record. I mean, I could sit there and pick up a guitar and take lessons for 4 years, and I would never be able to make a chord. And here's a guy who can play every musical instrument available to him. I just think it's amazing, and I think God picks people like that to change our lives. Obviously, my reason for being here is a different reason than writing music and producing records, and it is for you as well. And we'll know what that is in some time, I guess. We just got to keep pushing forward and doing what God gave us as a gift. But it's just amazing stuff. It really is.
I think maybe a gift we've been mutually blessed with is being able to appreciate that music. And really, I find myself, I was doing it yesterday. I have this real comfortable kind of lounge chair that I can drag outside. It is for that, but it's kind of a patio chair, but it's kind of reclines. It's really comfortable on a beautiful fall day. Yeah. I get burned out watching football for 48 straight hours. I find myself out in my backyard in my little lounger listening to music from all different eras. And I'm a lyrics guy, and that's what I really gravitate to. And when songs have come up that I've heard hundreds and hundreds of times, I'm really intrigued with what you listened to this morning, because it does have a neurological effect. But I've discovered something else you said yesterday. I came to the conclusion, I was listening to, you can just pick a genre, and I selected a band that a lot of people don't remember from the 60s, the Grassroots.
Oh man. Yes.
And if they had Midnight Confessions and Temptation Eyes and Live for Today and Walk a Million Miles. I mean, so many great songs, but they mix in all songs from their contemporaries. And I found something, Tony, that I found really fascinating yesterday. In 60s music, there are horns in just about every song that I never really caught on to before. I listened for the lyrics, and I love the music and the beats from that era, but horns were a huge influence. And I'm here today to publicly declare I wish we could bring. You said Quincy Jones was known as a master in terms of the trumpet. Boy, I'd like to have more of that reintroduced into music instead of this synthetic background thumpity thump that's on every song. To me, sounds the same in this era.
I would love that. I think that's why I like the Earth, Wind, and Fires. I like the Huey Lewis has had a lot of saxophone and horns in it.
Yeah.
One band, and I can remember every single time, because the minute I heard the first couple of beats of any song from this artist, and it was usually at church coming home on Sunday mornings when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, Chicago. Every time I heard a Chicago song, I knew, because I heard that trombone. You just don't hear trombones in songs.
The horns in Chicago songs,
they did that. They still do it. When they write music now, they write around a trombone. I mean, and they write hits. It's amazing stuff. So,
yeah. You listen to Springsteen and Billy Joel, the sax and the horns. I think it's tragic we've gotten away from that.
I agree with you. I don't know if we're ever going to be able to bring the big band back or swing music. Life is cyclical. But I do wonder what it's going to be like in 20 or 30 years. I'm pretty sure Jackson Brown and classic rock will be on the radio. I don't know if we're going to be hearing Beyonce music or Dr. Dre music or Eminem on radio stations in the year 2036. But I know that if it's good, it's got staying power and it'll be there for a long time. That goes for the producers of those songs as well. Great stuff, man. Thank you so much. Hey, don't forget to join us again on Saturday morning, 10:30, 11 o'clock, the starting lineup. Every single week, our show gets bigger and better. We, of course, do some dogs. We pick some dogs. We do our best bets. We'll go out to the desert with Case Keefer, of course. That is Kip's son. He's been on fire. And of course, the legend goes to the cave. And Terry Quillian, she'll also be back as well on Saturday morning. So we'll look forward to seeing you 10:30, 11 o'clock on ABC 3340. Make sure you tune in right here on Tony Curry Radio. Wherever you get your podcast, all you got to do is search Tony Curry Radio Podcast. You can find everything that Kip does for me and love the shows. Need to know if you have not decided who you're voting for tomorrow. First of all, Kip is think you're a knucklehead. He's like, what the hell's wrong with you? You should
make a
know by now.
decision.
But if you have not made a decision, you probably need to know before you actually make a call on that. So we'll see what happens, and I'm sure you're going to have a lot to say on next week's show after we find out. It may take next Monday before we find out actually who our next president is.
That's a tragedy. We don't need to get into that. But I may have moved to my private island in the Coral Seas if things don't go well.
Take care of yourself, brother. Thank you, man.
All right, Tony.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Curry Radio.